The text message glowed on the phone screen like a small bomb waiting to explode. Can't wait to see you tonight. Brandon promised me I could stay the whole weekend. Maybe it's time your wife knew the truth. Maybe it's time she stepped aside so we can finally be together without hiding. I'm tired of being your secret. I deserve to be seen. Natasha Pierce stood in the doorway of their bedroom, 7 months pregnant, her hand resting on her swollen belly as she read the words again. The phone belonged to her husband, Brandon. He had left it on the bathroom counter while he showered. She hadn't been snooping. The message notification had simply appeared when she walked past, and her eyes had caught the name, Simone. This wasn't the first message. For 3 weeks, Natasha had known. For 3 weeks, she had watched her husband come home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, making excuses about business meetings and client dinners. For 3 weeks, she had said nothing, waiting for the right moment. Tonight would be that moment. The annual Pierce Family Garden Party happened every June, a tradition that brought together business partners, family friends, and relatives to celebrate at the massive estate. The mansion sat on 12 acres of perfectly manicured gardens, with fountains and rose bushes and a view of the lake that made photographers weep. Natasha had designed every inch of it. She was an architect, one of the best in the state, and this mansion was her masterpiece. She had drawn the plans during her engagement to Brandon, presenting them as a gift to his family. Richard Pierce, her father-in-law, had been so impressed he'd insisted she oversee the entire construction. That was 5 years ago. Before the wedding. Before the promises. Before Brandon forgot how to look at her with love in his eyes. The shower turned off. Natasha set the phone back on the counter exactly where Brandon had left it. She walked to the closet and pulled out a blue dress, the color of a clear summer sky. The dress was designed for her changing body, flowing and comfortable but elegant. She would not hide. She would not shrink. She would walk into that party with her head high. Brandon emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, water still dripping from his dark hair. He stopped when he saw her holding the dress. "You're coming tonight?" His voice held a note of surprise, maybe concern. "Of course. It's your family's biggest event of the year. Why wouldn't I come?" Natasha kept her voice level, casual. "I just thought, with the pregnancy and everything, you might want to rest." "I feel fine." Brandon shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Tasha, maybe it would be better if you stayed home. You've been tired lately. Mom would understand." "I want to be there." She met his eyes in the mirror. "Unless there's a reason you don't want me there." "No. No reason." He turned away quickly, opening his own closet. "I just worry about you, that's all." "Liar." The words sat heavy in her chest, but she didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Tonight, in front of everyone, the truth would come out. Natasha had learned patience in the past 3 weeks. She had learned to watch and wait. She had learned that sometimes the best revenge wasn't screaming or throwing things or making scenes in private. Sometimes the best revenge was letting someone destroy themselves in public. "What time do we need to leave?" she asked. 6 o'clock. "The party starts at 7, but Dad wants us there early." Natasha nodded. She had 4 hours to prepare. 4 hours to make herself look beautiful and strong and unbreakable. 4 hours before she walked into a house full of people who would witness what happened next. She showered and took her time getting ready. The blue dress fit perfectly, flowing over her belly and falling to just below her knees. She chose silver jewelry, simple and elegant. Her hair, usually worn in a practical bun for work, she styled in soft curls that framed her face. Her skin glowed, that pregnancy glow everyone talked about, and she applied minimal makeup to enhance rather than hide her natural beauty. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who deserved better than lies and late-night text messages and promises broken without apology. Brandon wore a dark suit, checking his phone constantly as they prepared to leave. His jaw was tight with tension. Good. Let him be nervous. Let him wonder what would happen when his worlds collided. The drive to the Pierce estate took 20 minutes. They lived in the city, in a penthouse apartment that Brandon had insisted on buying 2 years ago. He said he needed to be closer to work. Now Natasha understood he needed to be closer to Simone. The mansion appeared at the end of a long driveway lined with ancient oak trees. White stone and tall windows, wraparound porches and gardens that looked like paintings. Natasha remembered standing on this empty land 5 years ago, imagining what could be built here. She remembered Richard Pierce telling her she had a gift, that she saw beauty where others saw only dirt and grass. Cars already filled the circular driveway. Valets in crisp uniforms directed traffic. White tents had been set up in the back gardens, visible from the front of the house. Waiters carried trays of champagne and appetizers. String lights hung between trees, ready to glow when evening came. Brandon parked and sat for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Are you okay?" Natasha asked, knowing he wasn't. "Fine. Just tired." He got out quickly, coming around to open her door. At least he remembered that courtesy. They walked toward the house together, but not touching. Once upon a time, Brandon would have taken her hand, tucked it into his arm, whispered jokes in her ear to make her smile. Now he walked a foot away, his attention on his phone. Richard Pierce appeared at the front door before they reached it. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered even at 58, with gray hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. He smiled when he saw Natasha, a genuine smile that reached those eyes. "Natasha, you look beautiful." He hugged her carefully, mindful of her belly. "How are you feeling?" "Good. Really good." "And the baby?" "Active. Very active." Natasha smiled, her hand on her stomach where tiny feet kicked against her ribs. Richard's expression shifted as he looked at his son. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication that Natasha couldn't quite read. Brandon's face paled slightly. "Son, glad you could make it." Richard's voice was cooler when he spoke to Brandon. "Of course, Dad. We need to talk later. Privately." Brandon nodded, swallowing hard. "Sure. Whatever you need." Richard turned back to Natasha, his warmth returning. "Your sister is already here. Diane's been looking for you. She's out in the gardens." "Thank you." Natasha squeezed his hand. Richard had always been good to her, treating her like a daughter from the moment Brandon brought her home. Whatever happened tonight, she hoped that wouldn't change. She walked through the house she had designed, each room exactly as she had imagined it. The grand foyer with its sweeping staircase. The living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. The kitchen with its marble counters and custom cabinets. Every detail had meaning, every choice had purpose. And somewhere in this house or in these gardens, Simone was waiting. The woman who thought she could take Natasha's place. The woman who had no idea what was coming. Natasha pushed open the French doors that led to the back terrace. Music drifted from hidden speakers. Guests mingled in clusters, holding drinks and laughing. The sun hung low in the sky, painting everything gold and pink. She stepped into the gardens, into the party, into the moment that would change everything. And she was ready. The gardens buzzed with conversation and laughter. At least 70 guests filled the space between the rose bushes and the fountain, dressed in summer best, holding crystal glasses that caught the late afternoon light. Natasha recognized most of the faces. Business partners from the Pierce Company. Family friends who had known Brandon since childhood. Distant cousins who appeared once a year for free food and networking opportunities. And there, standing near the fountain in a tight green dress that showed too much skin for a family event, stood Simone Carter. Natasha had seen photos on Brandon's phone, but seeing the woman in person felt different. Simone was younger than Natasha by a few years, maybe 26 or 27. She wore her hair in long extensions, her makeup heavy and dramatic. She laughed too loudly at something an older man said, touching his arm in a way that seemed calculated rather than natural. "She's been here for an hour already." Diane appeared at Natasha's elbow, following her sister's gaze. "Acting like she owns the place." Diane was 2 years older than Natasha, a lawyer with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. She wore a maroon dress that complemented her brown skin, her natural hair styled in elegant twists. She had been the first person Natasha told about Brandon's affair. "Did Brandon invite her?" Natasha asked, keeping her voice neutral. "Apparently she came with the Johnsons. Claims she's doing marketing work for their company." Diane's tone made it clear what she thought of that story. But she spent the whole time watching the house, waiting for Brandon to arrive. Natasha watched as Simone's eyes scanned the crowd, searching. When her gaze landed on Brandon, who had just stepped onto the terrace, her whole face changed. She smiled, bright and possessive, and started moving toward him. "Here we go," Diane muttered. Brandon saw Simone and froze. For a second, panic flashed across his face. He glanced at Natasha, then back at Simone, clearly calculating whether he could avoid this moment. But Simone was already weaving through the guests, her path direct and determined. "Brandon." She reached him, standing too close, her hand resting on his arm. "I've been waiting for you." "Simone." Brandon's voice was strained. He stepped back slightly, creating distance. "I didn't know you'd be here. The Johnsons invited me. You remember, I told you I'd been doing work for them." She looked around, her eyes landing on Natasha. "Oh, your wife came." The way she said wife, made it sound like something temporary, something easily replaced. Natasha walked forward, closing the distance between them. She would not hide in corners. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her retreat. Hello. Natasha extended her hand to Simone. I don't think we've met. I'm Natasha. Simone looked at the offered hand like it might bite her. After a pause too long to be polite, she shook it briefly. Simone. I work with the Johnsons. How nice. What kind of work do you do? Marketing. Social media campaigns, brand development. Simone's eyes flicked to Natasha's belly, then away. It keeps me very busy. I'm sure it does. Natasha smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Brandon stood between them, looking like he wanted to disappear into the garden path. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature. I need a drink, he announced suddenly. Excuse me. He walked away quickly, leaving Natasha and Simone facing each other. Diane moved closer, a silent show of support. Simone's expression changed once Brandon was out of earshot. The fake politeness dropped away, replaced by something harder. You know, don't you? Know what? Natasha kept her voice calm. About us. About Brandon and me. I know lots of things. Then you know it's over between you two. He's just waiting for the right time to tell you. Simone crossed her arms, her posture aggressive. He wants to be with me. He's told me everything. How you two barely talk anymore. How you've let yourself go. Her eyes traveled over Natasha's pregnant form with obvious disdain. He deserves someone who takes care of herself. Diane made a sound like a growl, stepping forward, but Natasha touched her arm gently. Does he? Natasha's statement wasn't a question. Yes. And frankly, if you had any dignity, you'd step aside gracefully instead of dragging this out. The pregnancy was obviously a last-ditch attempt to keep him, but it's not going to work. Interesting theory. It's not a theory. It's fact. Simone tossed her hair over her shoulder. Brandon and I are in love. We're planning a future together. You're just in the way. Before Natasha could respond, Margaret Pierce appeared beside them. Brandon's mother was an elegant woman in her mid-50s, her silver hair styled in a neat bob, wearing a cream-colored dress that screamed old money and good taste. Natasha, darling. Margaret kissed both of Natasha's cheeks. I'm so glad you came. You look absolutely radiant. Thank you, Margaret. Margaret turned to Simone, her expression cooling several degrees. I don't believe we've met. Simone Carter. I'm here with the Johnsons. How lovely. The Johnsons are such good friends of the family. Margaret's tone suggested she would be having words with the Johnsons later. I hope you're enjoying the party. It's beautiful. This house is incredible. Yes, it is. Our daughter-in-law designed it, you know. Every single detail. She's quite talented. Margaret squeezed Natasha's hand. We're very lucky to have her in the family. Simone's smile tightened. How nice. I'm sure that's fulfilling work. Oh, it's more than work, dear. Natasha owns her own architecture firm. She's designed buildings all over the state. Award-winning, in fact. Margaret's voice held a note of pride that was impossible to miss. What did you say you do again? Marketing. Ah. Well, we all have our callings, don't we? Margaret turned back to Natasha. Come, dear. There are some people I want you to meet. Business associates who are looking for an architect for their new headquarters. As Margaret led Natasha away, Natasha heard Simone mutter something under her breath. Diane, still standing nearby, gave Simone a look that could freeze fire. You should leave, Diane said quietly, her lawyer voice in full effect. Before you embarrass yourself further. I'm not going anywhere. Brandon invited me. Did he? That's interesting because he looked pretty surprised to see you. Simone's confidence wavered for just a second. Then she lifted her chin. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. And so does everyone else here. Diane gestured subtly to the nearby guests, many of whom were watching with poorly disguised interest. This isn't your world. These aren't your people. And that man you're chasing? He's not who you think he is. What's that supposed to mean? You'll find out soon enough. Diane walked away, leaving Simone standing alone near the fountain. Natasha let Margaret introduce her to the business associates, smiling and making polite conversation about design projects and timelines. But part of her attention stayed on Simone, watching as the woman searched the crowd for Brandon again. Brandon had retreated to a corner of the terrace, a drink in his hand, talking to his cousin Jeremy. He kept glancing toward Simone, then toward Natasha, his discomfort obvious to anyone paying attention. The sun dropped lower and the string lights began to glow. Waiters circulated with trays of food. Someone turned up the music slightly. The party moved into its peak hours, that moment when everyone relaxed and conversations flowed freely. Richard appeared on the main terrace, tapping a glass to get everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying across the gardens. "Margaret and I are grateful to have you here to celebrate another year of friendship and business success. Please enjoy the evening. Eat, drink, and be comfortable in this beautiful space that means so much to our family." Applause rippled through the crowd. Richard caught Natasha's eye and nodded slightly, something unreadable in his expression. Simone took advantage of the moment to slip closer to Brandon. Natasha watched as the woman whispered something in his ear, her hand sliding down his arm. Brandon's face turned red and he pulled away, but not before several guests noticed the intimate gesture. Whispers started in small pockets of the crowd. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. And Simone, emboldened by the alcohol she'd been drinking, smiled like she'd won something. That's when Natasha knew. This woman wasn't going to stay quiet. This woman wasn't going to pretend. This woman was here to stake a claim, to make a scene, to force the issue in the most public way possible. Good. Let her. Let her show everyone exactly who she was. Let her reveal her true self in front of all these witnesses. Because what Simone didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that the humiliation she was planning for Natasha would backfire in the most spectacular way. Natasha just had to wait a little longer. The moment came an hour later, when the sun had set completely and the gardens glowed with artificial light. Natasha stood near the dessert table, talking to one of Margaret's friends about a potential renovation project. Her back ached from standing, and the baby kicked persistently against her ribs, but she maintained her composure. She had learned over the years that architecture clients responded better to calm confidence than desperate enthusiasm. Simone approached with deliberate steps, her green dress swishing, her walk slightly unsteady from too much champagne. She had been drinking steadily since Natasha arrived, her behavior growing bolder with each glass. "Excuse me." Simone's voice cut through the conversation, loud enough that nearby groups paused their own discussions. "I need to talk to you." Margaret's friend, a woman named Patricia, glanced between them and made a quick excuse to leave. She sensed drama brewing and wanted no part of it. "Yes." Natasha turned to face Simone fully. "This is ridiculous. You being here pretending everything is fine." Simone's words slurred slightly. "Everyone knows. Everyone can see what's happening." "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play stupid. It doesn't suit you." Simone laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know Brandon doesn't want you anymore. You know he's been with me for months. So why are you here embarrassing yourself?" More conversations stopped. More heads turned. A circle of attention formed around them, guests pretending to look elsewhere while straining to hear every word. "I'm here because this is my family." Natasha kept her voice level, refusing to rise to the bait. "Your family." Simone practically spat the words. "For how much longer? Once the divorce happens, they won't want you around anymore. You'll be yesterday's news." "Simone." Brandon appeared suddenly, his hand reaching for her arm. "Stop. This isn't the time or place." She shook him off. "Why not? Why should we keep pretending? I'm tired of hiding, Brandon. I'm tired of being your secret while she gets to play the perfect wife." "You're drunk. Let me take you inside." "I'm not drunk. I'm just honest." Simone turned back to Natasha, her eyes bright with malice. "Look at you. Standing there in that dress, trying so hard to look dignified. But we all know what you really are. You're the help. You built this house, sure, but that doesn't make you one of them. Brandon married down when he chose you, and now he's trying to fix his mistake." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Diane moved forward, but Natasha held up a hand, stopping her sister. "Are you finished?" Natasha asked calmly. "No. I'm not finished." Simone's voice rose higher. "You need to hear this. Brandon has been planning to leave you for months. He stays because he feels guilty about the baby, but that's all. Obligation. Pity. Not love. Never love. He stopped loving you a long time ago. And he loves you instead?" "Yes, he does. We're going to be together in this house, living the life you thought was yours. He promised me. He said once he figures out the details, once he handles the divorce and the custody arrangements, we'll be a family. A real family. Not this sad pretense you're clinging to." Natasha felt 70 pairs of eyes watching her, waiting to see if she would break. Waiting to see tears or anger or some kind of emotional collapse. The old Natasha, the woman she had been before she found those text messages, might have cried, might have run from the humiliation. But 3 weeks of knowing, 3 weeks of planning had changed her. That's an interesting story, Natasha said. Brandon promised you this house? Yes, our house. Yours and Brandon's house. Except it won't be yours much longer. I see. Natasha looked at Brandon, who stood frozen, his face pale in the string lights. Is that what you told her? That you'd give her this house? Brandon's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Answer her, Simone demanded. Tell her the truth, Brandon. Tell her we're going to be together here. Simone, please. Brandon's voice came out as a desperate whisper. Not like this. Yes, like this. She deserves to know. Everyone deserves to know. Simone addressed the crowd now, playing to her audience. Brandon Pierce is in love with me. Has been for 8 months. And soon, very soon, I'll be the woman of this house. The silence that followed felt thick enough to touch. Even the music seemed quieter, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Richard Pierce stepped forward from wherever he had been standing, his expression dark as a thunderstorm. Margaret followed him, her usual pleasant demeanor replaced by cold fury. That's enough, Richard said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Simone turned to him, and for a moment uncertainty flickered across her face. But the alcohol and her own conviction pushed her forward. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Mr. Pierce. But your son and I are in love. I know it's complicated with the baby coming, but sometimes love doesn't wait for convenient timing. Love, Richard repeated, his tone making the word sound like something poisonous. Yes, real love. Not some outdated obligation. Simone gestured at Natasha dismissively. She's clearly not making Brandon happy. Anyone can see that. Sometimes marriages just don't work out, and it's better to be honest about it than to keep living a lie. You want honesty? Richard's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Let me give you honesty. Margaret placed a hand on her husband's arm, a gesture that seemed both supportive and restraining. She looked at Natasha with an expression that might have been apology or sadness or anger at what her son had done. Not yet, Margaret said quietly to Richard. Let her finish embarrassing herself first. Simone, too drunk or too arrogant to recognize the warning signs, continued. I know this is hard for everyone to accept. Change always is. But Brandon deserves to be happy. And so do I. We deserve to build a life together without judgment or guilt. In my house, Natasha said softly. In Brandon's house, Simone corrected. The Pierce family home. Right. The Pierce family home. Natasha smiled, a real smile this time because the moment had finally arrived. Tell me something, Simone. When Brandon promised you this house, did he mention who actually owns it? Confusion crossed Simone's face. What do you mean? Brandon is a Pierce. This is his family's estate. Was. Past tense. But things change, don't they? Natasha looked at Richard. I think now might be a good time for that honesty you mentioned. Richard nodded slowly. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking too quietly for anyone to hear. Less than a minute later, a man in a suit emerged from the house carrying a leather briefcase. Everyone, Richard announced, his voice commanding attention. I'd like you to meet Mr. Howard, our family lawyer. He's brought some documents I think we should all see. Particularly you, Miss Carter, since you seem so confident about your future in this house. Simone's confidence wavered. She looked at Brandon, seeking reassurance, but he had turned away, his hands covering his face. Mr. Howard opened his briefcase and removed a folder. He handed it to Richard, who held it up for everyone to see. These are property deeds, Richard said. Legal documents showing ownership of this estate and several other Pierce family assets. Would you like to know whose name is on these documents, Miss Carter? The gardens had gone completely silent now. Not a single person moved. Brandon's, Simone said, but her voice had lost its earlier certainty. No, Richard said. Not Brandon's. Not mine. Not Margaret's. He paused, letting the suspense build. Every single property deed, every business asset, every account has one name on it. He turned to look at Natasha, and something like pride shone in his eyes. Natasha Pierce. My daughter-in-law. The real owner of everything you see here. The gasps this time were louder, shocked, disbelieving. Simone's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, denial, horror, rage. That's not possible, she whispered. Oh, it's very possible, Richard said. In fact, it's documented, legal, and absolutely true. And as the full weight of those words settled over the party, Natasha felt something shift inside her. Not triumph exactly, but something quieter. Relief. The terrible anticipation of this moment had been worse than the moment itself. Now the truth was out. And nothing would ever be the same. The gardens erupted into noise. Voices overlapped, questions flying from every direction. Simone stood frozen, her mouth hanging open, all her earlier confidence evaporated. Brandon had sunk onto a nearby bench, his head in his hands. Natasha felt dizzy. Not from shock or emotion but from standing too long. The baby kicked hard against her ribs and her back throbbed. She needed to sit down, needed water, needed air that didn't feel thick with 70 people's stares. "Excuse me," she said to no one in particular, and walked toward the far end of the garden where a small gazebo overlooked the lake. She made it halfway before Diane caught up with her, taking her arm gently. "Easy. Slow down. I need to get away from them." "I know. Come on." They reached the gazebo and Natasha collapsed onto the bench inside, breathing hard. The structure was far enough from the main party that the noise became a dull roar rather than individual voices. String lights wrapped around the posts, casting soft shadows. Diane sat beside her, pulling a bottle of water from seemingly nowhere. "Drink this." Natasha obeyed, the cool liquid helping to clear her head. Her hands shook slightly as she held the bottle. "That was..." Diane started, then stopped. "I have no words. Did you know Richard was going to do that? Drop that bomb in front of everyone? I knew he had documents. He told me yesterday he wanted to make sure everyone understood the truth." Natasha took another sip of water. "I didn't realize he'd do it quite so dramatically. Drama was needed. That woman..." Diane's voice filled with disgust. "The things she said to you. The way she talked about you like you were nothing. Like you were disposable. She believed what Brandon told her. That's not an excuse. And Brandon..." Diane stood up, pacing the small space of the gazebo. "I want to hurt him. I want to physically hurt him for what he did to you. Violence won't help. Maybe not, but it would feel good." Diane stopped pacing, looking at her sister. "How are you so calm? How are you not screaming or crying or throwing things?" Natasha pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palm. "Because I knew this was coming. I've had 3 weeks to process it, 3 weeks to plan. And because falling apart won't change anything. You're stronger than me. I would have burned his clothes by now." A laugh escaped Natasha, surprising them both. "I considered it. Trust me." They sat in silence for a moment, the lake water lapping gently against the shore below them. Music still drifted from the party, though it sounded more subdued now. "Can I ask you something?" Diane said carefully. "Always. When did Richard transfer everything to your name? And why? That's not normal. Father-in-laws don't just sign over their entire estates to their children's spouses." Natasha had been expecting this question. She set down the water bottle and looked out at the lake. "It was a wedding gift. 5 years ago. Richard called me into his office 2 days before the ceremony and presented me with papers. He said he'd been impressed with my work on the house design, with how I handled the construction project, with my business sense. He told me he'd watched me over the year Brandon and I were engaged, and he believed I had something his son lacked." "What?" "Vision. Drive. Integrity." Natasha's voice was quiet. "He said Brandon was a good person but had always taken things for granted. That he'd never had to work for anything, never had to prove himself. Richard was worried about what would happen to the family business if he passed it on to Brandon without any checks and balances. So he gave it to you instead. Not instead. In addition to. He structured it so that Brandon could work in the business, could earn his position and his share. But the final ownership, the controlling interest, stayed with me. Richard said it was insurance. That if Brandon ever proved himself worthy, we could restructure things. But if he didn't..." Natasha trailed off. "Then you had the power to protect yourself in the business." "Exactly." Diane shook her head in wonder. "That's brilliant. Ruthless but brilliant. Did Brandon know?" "No. Richard made me promise not to tell him. He wanted Brandon to value our marriage for the right reasons, not because I held the purse strings. He thought if Brandon knew I owned everything, it would change the dynamic between us." He was probably right. Maybe. Or maybe it wouldn't have mattered. Maybe Brandon would have cheated anyway. Natasha felt tears prick at her eyes, the first real emotions of the evening breaking through her careful control. "That's what hurts the most, you know. Not the affair itself but what it means. I loved him. I built a life with him. And somewhere along the way he stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as an obstacle." Diane moved closer, wrapping an arm around Natasha's shoulders. "His loss. his massive, catastrophic loss. It doesn't feel that way right now. It feels like I failed. No. He failed. He had everything, Tasha. A brilliant, beautiful wife who loved him. A baby on the way. A good life even if he didn't realize how good. And he threw it away for what? A woman who only wanted him for money he doesn't even have. She didn't know. About the money, I mean. But she wanted it. You could see it in her eyes, the way she looked at this place. She thought she was trading up, landing a rich man who could give her a mansion and a lifestyle. She's a gold digger who picked the wrong target. Natasha wiped at her eyes. I should feel vindicated. I should feel satisfied that the truth came out and she was humiliated instead of me. But I just feel tired. You're allowed to be tired. You're 7 months pregnant and your husband is a cheating piece of trash. Tired is the minimum you should be feeling. Footsteps sounded on the path leading to the gazebo. Both women looked up to see Richard approaching, his expression concerned. May I join you? He asked. Natasha nodded and he climbed the steps into the gazebo, sitting on the bench across from them. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I should have given you more warning about what I planned to do. That was unfair of me. It's okay. It's not okay. You deserved better than being surprised like that in front of everyone. Richard leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. But when I heard what that woman was saying to you, when I saw my son standing there letting her attack you, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. What's happening back there? Natasha gestured toward the main party. Chaos mostly. Margaret is ushering Simone off the property. Several guests have offered to drive her home since she's clearly had too much to drink. Brandon is. Richard paused. My son is learning what consequences feel like. Is he angry? Shocked, I think. He genuinely had no idea about the property ownership. No idea that he's been living in your house, working in your business for 5 years. Richard's voice held disappointment and something sadder. I raised him to be better than this, Natasha. I thought I taught him to value the right things. You did your best. My best produced a man who cheated on his pregnant wife. So clearly it wasn't good enough. Richard stood up and walked to the edge of the gazebo, looking back toward the lit-up mansion. That house was supposed to be a symbol of new beginnings. A fresh start for the family. And now it represents my son's failure. The house is just a building, Natasha said softly. It's the people inside that matter. Wise words. Richard turned back to her. What are you going to do now? I don't know yet. You have options. Full control means you can make whatever decisions you need to make. Diane stood up, her protective instincts clearly triggered. Are you suggesting she should take everything from him? Leave him with nothing? I'm suggesting, Richard said carefully, that Natasha should do whatever is best for her and her child. If that means removing Brandon from the business, from the properties, from their shared life entirely, then she has every legal right to do so. If she chooses to be merciful, that's also her decision. And what do you think she should do? Diane challenged. I think my daughter-in-law should take her time, consult with good lawyers and make informed choices based on what will create the healthiest future for her daughter. Richard looked at Natasha. Because you're having a girl, aren't you? Brandon mentioned it. Natasha nodded, her hand on her belly. Ruby. We decided to name her Ruby. Beautiful name. Strong name. Richard smiled sadly. Ruby deserves to grow up seeing her mother treated with respect. She deserves to learn from your example that women are powerful, capable, and shouldn't settle for men who don't appreciate them. Even when that man is your son? Especially when that man is my son. I love Brandon, but I won't defend the indefensible. What he did was wrong, and the person he hurt most was someone I care about deeply. Richard crossed the gazebo and crouched down in front of Natasha, taking her hands in his. You're my family too. Regardless of what happens with Brandon, that doesn't change. You designed this house. You've been a partner in this business. You've been a good daughter to Margaret and me. None of that goes away because my son is a fool. Tears spilled down Natasha's cheeks, the kindness almost harder to bear than Simone's cruelty had been. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm about to make things more complicated. Richard squeezed her hands and then stood up. Mr. Howard is still here. I've asked him to wait in my study. I think the three of us should sit down and discuss your options. Tonight, before emotions fade and before Brandon tries to negotiate or make promises he won't keep. Tonight? Right now. Strike while the iron is hot, as they say. Or in this case, while the humiliation is fresh and the truth is out. Richard's expression turned serious. Simone Carter isn't the only problem. There are financial considerations, business implications, legal protections you need to put in place immediately. The next few days will determine how the rest of this situation plays out. We need to be strategic. Diane nodded approvingly. I like how you think. Will you come? Richard asked Natasha. Or would you rather go home and rest? We can do this tomorrow if tonight is too much. Natasha thought about Brandon, probably still sitting on that bench in the garden, his carefully constructed life falling apart. She thought about Simone, being escorted off the property, her dreams of mansion life dissolving into humiliation. She thought about the 70 guests who would go home tonight with the best gossip they'd had in years. And she thought about Ruby, her daughter, growing inside her. The daughter who would need her mother to be strong, to be smart, to make decisions that protected them both. Let's do it now, Natasha said, standing up with Diane's help. While I have the courage. You have more than courage, Richard said. You have every advantage. Let's make sure you keep them. They walked back toward the mansion together, leaving the gazebo and the lake behind. As they passed through the gardens, Natasha noticed the party had thinned significantly. Guests were making quiet exits, their curiosity satisfied, their desire for drama fulfilled. Brandon stood near the terrace with Margaret, his mother talking to him in low, urgent tones. He looked up as Natasha walked past, his eyes pleading, but she didn't stop. Didn't pause. Didn't give him the confrontation he probably wanted. There would be time for that later. Time for lawyers and negotiations and dividing up a life they'd built together. But tonight was about something else. Tonight was about taking control of her own story, about making decisions from a position of strength rather than heartbreak. Tonight was the beginning of the end. And tomorrow would be the start of something new. Richard's study was on the second floor of the mansion, a room Natasha had designed with masculine elegance in mind. Dark wood panels, built-in bookshelves, a massive desk positioned to catch the light from tall windows. Leather chairs faced the desk and a small conference table sat in the corner for meetings. Mr. Howard was already seated at the conference table, his briefcase open, documents spread across the polished surface. He stood when they entered, extending his hand to Natasha. Mrs. Pierce. I'm glad you agreed to meet tonight. I'm not sure I had much choice, Natasha said, sinking into one of the conference chairs. Her feet ached from standing at the party, and exhaustion pulled at her limbs. You always have choices. That's the point of this meeting. Mr. Howard sat back down, adjusting his glasses. To make sure you understand exactly what options are available to you. Diane took the chair next to her sister, pulling out a small notepad from her purse. I'm here as moral support and as a lawyer, though family law isn't my specialty. I practice corporate law. Any legal perspective is helpful, Mr. Howard said. He looked at Richard, who had moved to stand by the window rather than sit. Should we wait for Mrs. Pierce? Your wife wanted to be part of this discussion. She's dealing with Brandon right now, making sure he understands the gravity of what he's done. Richard's voice was tight. She'll join us if she can, but we should proceed. Mr. Howard nodded and began organizing the papers in front of him. Let's start with the basics. Mrs. Pierce, 5 years ago, on the occasion of your wedding to Brandon Pierce, Mr. Richard Pierce transferred the deed to this property and controlling shares in Pierce Enterprises to your name. Do you recall signing these documents? Yes. Though at the time, I didn't fully understand the implications. You were 24 years old. Richard wanted to ensure you had financial security and legal protection. Mr. Howard pulled out a document and slid it across the table. This is the original deed transfer. As you can see, the property is solely in your name. Not jointly held. Not part of a marital estate. Solely yours. Natasha studied the document, seeing her signature at the bottom next to Richard's. Why did you structure it this way? Why not make it joint ownership? Because joint ownership could be contested in divorce proceedings, Diane said, reading over her shoulder. This way it's your separate property, obtained before the marriage in a sense, even though the wedding hadn't happened yet. It's protected. Exactly, Mr. Howard confirmed. Mr. Pierce was quite strategic in his planning. The same structure applies to the business shares. You own 60% of Pierce Enterprises. Richard holds 25%. Brandon has 15%, which was gifted to him on his 25th birthday, before your relationship began. So Brandon does own part of the company? A small part. Not enough to make major decisions. Not enough to override your authority as majority shareholder. Mr. Howard pulled out another document. This is the corporate structure. As you can see, you've been listed as the primary decision maker for 5 years. Any major business moves require your signature. But I've never signed anything. Brandon handles all the business dealings. Not all. You've signed quarterly reports, annual statements, tax documents. You probably didn't realize what you were signing, but legally, your approval has been documented on every significant business action. Natasha felt a wave of realization wash over her. All those papers Brandon brought home for her to sign, claiming they were routine paperwork. All the times Richard asked her to review documents before family dinners. She thought she was just being included as a courtesy, but actually she'd been running the business all along. I feel incredibly stupid right now, she said quietly. Don't. Richard turned from the window, his expression firm. You trusted people you should have been able to trust. That's not stupidity. That's faith, and there's nothing wrong with that. Except Brandon abused that trust, Diane added. And now we need to make sure he can't do it again. Mr. Howard cleared his throat. Which brings us to the current situation. Mrs. Pierce, you're 7 months pregnant with Brandon's child. You've discovered his infidelity. Based on what happened tonight, I assume you want to pursue divorce. Yes. The word came out stronger than Natasha expected. I do. Then we need to move quickly. In this state, you have significant advantages. The property is yours. The business is yours. Because you married after these assets were transferred, they're not considered marital property. Brandon would have a very difficult time claiming any portion in divorce proceedings. What about Ruby? The baby? Custody and support are separate issues. Brandon is the father, which gives him parental rights regardless of the divorce. However, as the primary income earner and property owner, you would likely be granted primary custody with Brandon receiving visitation. He'll fight that. He'll want shared custody. He can fight all he wants. The courts favor stability for the child. You have a home, a business, financial security. What does Brandon have? Mr. Howard's tone wasn't cruel, just factual. He's been living off your assets for 5 years. He has his 15% of the business, which generates income, but compared to your 60%, it's minimal. Diane leaned forward. What kind of income are we talking about? From that 15%. Mr. Howard consulted another document. Last year, dividends from his shares totaled approximately $100,000. That's a decent salary, Natasha said. It's comfortable. But it's not mansion living money. It's not keeping a mistress money. Brandon has been living a lifestyle far above what his actual assets would support, subsidized entirely by your generosity. The door to the study opened and Margaret entered, looking exhausted. Her earlier elegant composure had frayed at the edges. She closed the door behind her and moved to sit in the remaining chair at the table. I'm sorry I'm late. Brandon was difficult. What did he say? Richard asked. Everything you'd expect. That he made a mistake. That Simone means nothing. That he loves Natasha and wants to work things out. Margaret looked at Natasha with sad eyes. He's downstairs in the kitchen, asking to speak with you. I don't want to see him right now. I told him as much. He's not listening. Then we'll have security escort him out if necessary, Richard said firmly. This is Natasha's house. She decides who stays and who goes. The statement hung in the air, a reminder of the power shift that had occurred in the past few hours. Mr. Howard continued as if there had been no interruption. Mrs. Pierce, I need to ask some direct questions. Have you and Brandon maintained separate bank accounts during your marriage? We have a joint account for household expenses. But I also have my own business accounts for the architecture firm. Good. I recommend you remove his access to the joint account immediately. Tonight if possible. We don't want him draining funds in response to the divorce filing. Diane pulled out her phone. I can help with that. Tasha, give me your banking information and I'll call to have his name removed. Most banks have 24-hour lines for this kind of thing. Is that legal? Just removing him from an account. It's your money that goes into that account, Mr. Howard said. He has no legal claim to it. You're well within your rights to restrict access, especially given the circumstances. Natasha recited her account numbers and passwords to Diane, who stepped out of the room to make the calls. The efficiency of it all made Natasha's head spin. 2 hours ago, she'd been standing in a garden, trying to maintain dignity while being publicly insulted. Now she was dismantling her marriage with the help of lawyers and accountants. What about the apartment in the city? She asked. We bought that together 2 years ago. Actually, you bought it. Brandon's name is on the deed, but the down payment and all mortgage payments have come from your accounts. In a divorce, you could argue it's your separate property acquired during the marriage with your separate funds. Or we could offer it to him as part of the settlement, Richard suggested. Let him have the apartment. He needs somewhere to live and it keeps him out of this house. That's generous, Mr. Howard noted. That's strategic, Richard corrected. Give him something so he feels less attacked. Make the divorce easier. Natasha doesn't need the apartment anyway. She'll live here in the house she designed. Will I? Natasha looked around the study, imagining herself living in this massive place alone with a baby. It's so big. Too big for just me and Ruby. So hire staff. Hire a nanny. Hire whoever you need to feel safe and supported. Margaret reached across the table to take Natasha's hand. Or don't live here. Sell it and buy something else. It's your choice, darling. That's the point of all this. You get to choose your own future now. Diane came back into the room, her phone still in her hand. Done. His access to the joint account is revoked. They're sending confirmation by email. Excellent. Mr. Howard made a note on his pad. Next issue. The architecture firm. That's entirely separate from Pierce Enterprises, correct? Yes. I started it before I met Brandon. It's always been mine alone. Good. That's one less complication. Mr. Howard shuffled through more papers. Now let's discuss timing. I can have divorce papers drawn up and ready to file by tomorrow afternoon. However, I'd recommend waiting a few days. Let the dust settle from tonight. Let Brandon process what's happened. Sometimes a little time makes people more reasonable in negotiations. Or more angry, Diane countered. Possibly. But rushing in when emotions are high often leads to protracted legal battles. If we give Brandon a few days to calm down, to realize his position, he might be more willing to accept a fair settlement without fighting. What's fair in this situation? Natasha asked. You keep the house, the business, your firm. He keeps his 15% of Pierce Enterprises and gets the apartment. You work out custody arrangements for Ruby that prioritize her stability. He pays child support based on his income from the business shares. That's more than fair, Richard said. That's practically generous given what he's done. The goal isn't punishment, Mr. Howard reminded them. The goal is a clean break that protects Mrs. Pierce and her daughter. If we push too hard, if we try to take everything, Brandon could dig in his heels and make this ugly. Give him enough to feel like he has something to hold on to, and he might sign without a fight. Natasha thought about Brandon, her husband of 5 years, the father of her unborn child. She thought about the man she'd fallen in love with, who'd been charming and attentive and made her laugh. And she thought about the man who'd betrayed her, who'd let his mistress insult her in public, who'd lived off her success while looking elsewhere for satisfaction. I want him out of the house, she said finally. Tomorrow. He can take his personal belongings and move into the apartment. Everything else we can negotiate through lawyers. That's reasonable, Mr. Howard said. And I want full custody with him having supervised visitation until Ruby is older and we can reassess. The supervised part might be difficult to enforce without evidence of danger or instability. Then we'll settle for primary custody with him having visitation rights that don't disrupt Ruby's schedule or stability. Mr. Howard nodded, making notes. I can work with that. They spent another hour going over details. Financial accounts to freeze. Assets to document. Business decisions that needed immediate attention. By the time they finished, Natasha felt wrung out and empty. Margaret walked her to one of the guest rooms on the second floor. You're staying here tonight. I won't hear any arguments. You're exhausted and it's late. You shouldn't be driving. What about Brandon? He left an hour ago. Richard had security escort him out after he refused to leave voluntarily. Margaret helped Natasha out of her shoes. I'm sorry, darling. I'm so sorry you're going through this. It's not your fault. He's my son. I raised him. Somewhere, I failed to teach him how to be a good husband. You taught him. He just didn't listen. Natasha sat on the edge of the bed, her body aching. Can I ask you something? Anything. Did you know? About Richard transferring everything to my name? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Yes, I knew. Richard discussed it with me before he did it. I supported the decision. Why? Because I saw what my son was becoming. Entitled. Complacent. Taking you for granted. Margaret sat beside her on the bed. You were different from the other women he'd dated. You were brilliant and kind and hardworking. You didn't care about his family's money. You had your own career, your own dreams. Richard and I both thought you were too good for Brandon, honestly. But you loved him and he seemed to love you, so we hoped for the best. But you planned for the worst. We planned for reality. Money changes people. Having too much of it, especially money you didn't earn, can make you think you're special when you're really just lucky. Margaret's voice was sad. Brandon was always a good boy. Sweet and funny and generous. But he never had to struggle. Never had to prove himself. Everything came easily because of his last name. Richard worried that would make him weak. Turns out Richard was right. I feel like I should have seen this coming. No one sees betrayal coming. That's what makes it betrayal. If it was obvious, it wouldn't hurt so much. Margaret hugged Natasha gently. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be difficult, but you'll get through it. You're stronger than you know. After Margaret left, Natasha changed into pajamas that Margaret had thoughtfully provided, brushed her teeth with a new toothbrush from the guest bathroom, and climbed into bed. The room was dark and quiet, so different from the noise and drama of the evening. Through the window she could see the gardens below, the string lights still glowing, the fountain still running. Her phone buzzed. Text messages from Brandon, dozens of them, begging her to talk to him, to give him a chance to explain, to not make any hasty decisions. She turned off the phone without reading them all. Tomorrow she would face him. Tomorrow she would stand in her own house and tell him to leave. Tomorrow she would begin the process of divorcing a man she'd once loved with her whole heart. But tonight she just needed to sleep and dream of a future where she was free. Morning came too early, sunlight streaming through the unfamiliar windows of the guest room. Natasha woke to the sound of birds and the distant hum of lawn equipment. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back. The party. The humiliation. The revelation. The divorce. Her phone, turned back on, showed 47 missed calls and 63 text messages, mostly from Brandon. A few from concerned friends who'd been at the party. One from her mother, Grace, asking her to call as soon as possible. Natasha sat up slowly, her body stiff and uncomfortable. Pregnancy at 7 months meant nothing felt quite right anymore. Her back hurt, her feet were swollen, and Ruby seemed determined to kick her way into the world early. A soft knock at the door. Natasha? Are you awake? Margaret's voice. Natasha called for her to come in. Margaret entered carrying a tray with breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, orange juice. I thought you might be hungry. You barely ate anything at the party yesterday. Thank you. Natasha accepted the tray, surprised to find herself actually hungry despite everything. Margaret sat in the chair by the window watching as Natasha ate. Mr. Howard called this morning. He's prepared initial divorce documents and wants to know when you're ready to review them. Already? He worked through the night apparently. Richard pays him well for his efficiency. Natasha chewed her toast slowly, thinking. Where's Brandon? At the apartment in the city. Richard called him this morning and told him you'd be by at noon to discuss moving arrangements. He's agreed to meet you there. I don't want to go alone. You won't. Diane is downstairs having coffee. She's offered to accompany you. So have I, if you want both of us there. Yes, please. The thought of facing Brandon by herself made Natasha's stomach clench. Having her sister and mother-in-law there would provide a buffer against whatever emotional manipulation he might try. She finished breakfast while Margaret filled her in on the aftermath of the party. Most guests had left quickly after the revelation, but several had stayed to offer support to Natasha. The Johnsons, who'd brought Simone, had been mortified and apologetic. They claimed they'd had no idea about the affair, thought Simone was just a business contact who needed a ride. Do you believe them? Natasha asked. I do actually. The Johnsons are good people. They wouldn't knowingly help someone hurt our family. Margaret stood up, collecting the breakfast tray. Get dressed. We'll leave in an hour. Wear something that makes you feel powerful. After Margaret left, Natasha showered and dressed carefully. She chose a green dress, fitted at the top and flowing over her belly, paired with comfortable flats. She styled her hair simply, applied light makeup, and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked tired. But she also looked determined. Downstairs, Diane waited in the foyer, dressed in her professional lawyer attire, a maroon pantsuit and heels. She handed Natasha a folder. I made copies of all the important documents from last night. Property deeds, business papers, bank statements. Keep these in your car or somewhere Brandon can't access them. You think he'd try to take them? I think desperate people do desperate things. And Brandon is about to realize how desperate his situation is. They drove in Diane's car, Margaret following in her own vehicle. The city apartment was 20 minutes away, located in an upscale building with a doorman and underground parking. Natasha had loved this place when they bought it, had imagined it as their city escape when they needed a break from the mansion's grandeur. Now it just felt like another thing that had been tainted by lies. Brandon answered the door immediately when they knocked, as if he'd been waiting right behind it. He looked terrible. Unshaven, red-eyed, his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. Tasha. Thank God. He tried to hug her, but she stepped back. Don't. His arms dropped. Please. Can we talk? Just the two of us. No. Anything you have to say can be said in front of Diane and your mother. Brandon's eyes flicked to Margaret, and something like shame crossed his face. Mom, you don't need to be here for this. Yes, I do. Someone needs to make sure you behave like a gentleman instead of a coward. Margaret's voice was ice cold, a tone Natasha had never heard from her before. They moved into the apartment's living room. Natasha remained standing, not wanting to get comfortable, not wanting this to take longer than necessary. Brandon ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture. I know you're angry. I know I messed up. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through the problems. Simone was a mistake, a stupid mistake, and I ended it. It's over. When did you end it? Diane asked, her lawyer voice in full effect. Last night. After everything that happened, I called her and told her we were done. So you didn't end it before last night? You ended it only after you were publicly humiliated and exposed. Brandon flinched. It wasn't like that. What was it like then? Diane pressed. When exactly were you planning to end it? Before or after your wife gave birth? Before or after Simone convinced you to divorce Natasha? I was never going to divorce Natasha. I love her. You have a strange way of showing love. Margaret's words cut through the room. Letting your mistress insult your pregnant wife in public. Spending money that isn't yours on a relationship based on lies. Making promises you had no authority to keep. I didn't know about the house, about the business being in Tasha's name. Dad never told me. Because it didn't matter, Natasha said quietly. Or it shouldn't have mattered. We were married. We were supposed to be partners. The fact that I legally own things shouldn't have changed anything. It wouldn't have. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything, Brandon. Because now I know the truth. You weren't with me because you loved me. You were with me because I gave you a comfortable life. That's not true. I've always loved you. Then why did you cheat? The question that had been burning in her chest for 3 weeks finally escaped. Why did you risk everything for Simone? What did she give you that I couldn't? Brandon's face crumbled. Attention. She made me feel important, like I mattered. You were always so busy with your work, your projects, your clients. I felt like I came second. I was building a career. Building a life for us. I know that now. But at the time, it felt like you'd rather be at your drafting table than with me. Brandon moved closer, his voice pleading. I'm not making excuses. What I did was wrong. But I'm trying to explain why it happened. I felt lonely. I felt like I was losing you. And Simone paid attention to me. She made me feel seen. So this is my fault? Natasha's voice rose. I worked too much, so you decided to have an affair? No. That's not what I'm saying. The affair was my choice, my failure. I'm just trying to help you understand. I understand perfectly. Natasha pulled documents from her purse, the divorce papers Mr. Howard had prepared. I want a divorce, Brandon. I want you to sign these papers and agree to the terms we've outlined. Brandon's face went white. No. Tasha, no. Please. We can work this out. Don't throw away 5 years of marriage over one mistake. One mistake. How long was the affair, Brandon? He hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything. 8 months, he finally admitted. But it meant nothing. It was just physical, just a distraction. 8 months. Our entire pregnancy you've been with her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Tears started down his face. Please don't do this. Think about Ruby. She deserves to have her parents together. Ruby deserves to have parents who respect each other. Parents who model healthy relationships. Not parents who stay together out of obligation while one of them cheats. Natasha held out the papers. Read them. If you have issues with any of the terms, your lawyer can contact Mr. Howard. But the divorce is happening whether you sign now or later. Brandon took the papers with shaking hands. He flipped through them quickly, his expression growing more distressed with each page. You're taking everything. The house, the business, custody of Ruby. I'm keeping what's already mine. And I'm offering you the apartment and your shares in Pierce Enterprises. That's more than fair. Fair? You're leaving me with nothing. I'm leaving you with exactly what you brought to the marriage, Diane interjected. You're 15% of the business which you received before you even met Natasha. She's being generous by letting you keep this apartment since technically she paid for it. I can't live on what my shares generate. Not the lifestyle we've had. Then adjust your lifestyle, Margaret said sharply. Get a real job. Work for your money like everyone else. Your father and I coddled you and this is the result. Time to grow up, Brandon. Brandon looked at his mother, betrayal written across his face. You're taking her side? I'm taking the side of what's right. Natasha has done nothing wrong. You have. Face the consequences of your actions like a man instead of whining like a child. Mom? Sign the papers, Brandon. Move on with your life. Let Natasha move on with hers. Brandon looked at Natasha, one last desperate attempt. Is this really what you want? To end us? You ended us when you started sleeping with Simone. I'm just making it official. Natasha's voice was steady, though her heart was breaking. You have 48 hours to move your personal belongings out of the mansion. After that, I'll have locks changed and security protocols updated. You're no longer welcome in my home. Your home, Brandon repeated bitterly. Right. Your home, your business, your everything. I was just living in your shadow the whole time. You could have been my partner. My equal. Instead, you chose to be my betrayer. Natasha turned toward the door. Sign the papers or don't. But either way, we're done. She walked out of the apartment, Diane and Margaret following. They made it to the elevator before Natasha's legs started shaking. Diane caught her, holding her up. I've got you. You did great. So strong. The elevator doors closed, shutting out Brandon's apartment, shutting out that chapter of her life. When they reached the parking garage, Natasha leaned against Diane's car and let herself cry. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears of loss and grief and relief all mixed together. Margaret hugged her from one side, Diane from the other, creating a protective circle around her. It gets easier, Margaret promised. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But eventually it gets easier. Did it? When Richard's brother divorced, did it get easier for him? Eventually. He had to rebuild his life, figure out who he was without his wife. But he did it. And he's happy now, happier than he was in the marriage. Margaret pulled back, looking at Natasha seriously. You're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to thrive. They drove back to the mansion in silence. When they arrived, Richard was waiting in the driveway. How did it go? He asked. As well as could be expected, Diane answered. He's either going to sign the papers or make this difficult. 50-50 odds. He'll sign, Richard said with certainty. I spoke with him this morning before you arrived. Made it clear that if he fights this divorce, if he tries to make Natasha's life harder than it already is, I'll cut him off completely. No family support, no business connections, nothing. He knows I mean it. That seems harsh, Natasha said. What he did to you was harsh. This is consequences. Richard opened the car door for her. Come inside. Mr. Howard wants to go over some additional paperwork. Business things that need your attention. The rest of the day passed in a blur of documents and signatures and legal discussions. Natasha signed papers transferring assets, protecting accounts, establishing formal business structures that had existed informally before. By evening she was exhausted. She retreated to the master bedroom, the room she'd slept in with Brandon in this mansion during family visits. Tomorrow she'd need to decide if she was moving here permanently or staying in the city apartment or finding somewhere entirely new. Tomorrow she'd need to figure out how to be a single mother, a business owner, a woman rebuilding her life from scratch. But tonight she just needed to rest. She lay on the bed, her hand on her belly where Ruby kicked and moved, and she made a silent promise to her daughter. I'll be strong for you. I'll show you what it means to value yourself, to demand respect, to never settle for less than you deserve. Your father made mistakes, but that doesn't mean you'll grow up without love. You'll have me and Aunt Diane and Grandma Grace and Grandma Margaret and Grandpa Richard. You'll have so much love, Ruby. So much strength around you. The baby kicked in response as if she understood. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Natasha felt something other than pain or anger or betrayal. She felt hope. 2 days later, Natasha stood in the entrance hall of the mansion, watching through the tall windows as a moving truck pulled up the driveway. Brandon was coming to collect his belongings right on time. Diane stood beside her, arms crossed. You sure you want to be here for this? I need to be. This is my house. I'm not hiding. Richard had suggested Natasha make herself scarce, let Brandon pack without the awkwardness of her presence. But Natasha refused. She'd spent too many years accommodating Brandon's comfort at the expense of her own. No more. The truck parked and Brandon got out of the passenger side. 2 professional movers emerged from the cab, ready to work. Brandon walked toward the front door slowly, reluctantly, like a man approaching his own execution. Natasha opened the door before he could knock. You have 4 hours, she said without preamble. Everything you want needs to be loaded by 5 o'clock. After that, the truck leaves whether you're finished or not. Tasha, can we at least talk about this? No. Take your things and go. I signed the papers. Mr. Howard should have them by now. I know. He called this morning. Natasha stepped aside, allowing Brandon and the movers to enter. Your personal clothes and belongings only. No furniture, no artwork, no household items. Those stay with the house. Half that stuff is mine. No, it's not. I bought it, I chose it, I arranged it. You just lived here. Natasha's voice was firm. Check the inventory list if you're confused about what you can take. She handed him a printed document, 3 pages long, detailing exactly what items he was permitted to remove from the property. Mr. Howard had been thorough. Brandon scanned the list, his jaw tightening. This is excessive. This is fair. You get your clothes, your personal electronics, your books, your golf clubs. Things that are unquestionably yours. Everything else stays. What about the painting in the bedroom? My grandmother gave us that as a wedding present. She gave it to us. Plural. It stays. Natasha wouldn't budge on this. If you want to contest any items on the list, have your lawyer contact Mr. Howard. But you're not walking out of here with anything we haven't agreed to in advance. Brandon looked like he wanted to argue further, but the movers were waiting, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic tension. He gestured for them to follow him upstairs. Diane waited until they were out of earshot. You're handling this better than I would. I'd have burned his clothes by now. Tempting. But illegal. Natasha moved to the living room, sitting in one of the leather chairs by the window where she could watch the truck being loaded without being in the way. The process took longer than expected. Brandon kept coming down the stairs with items not on the approved list, arguing they were his, forcing Natasha to check receipts and credit card statements on her phone to prove she'd purchased them. Each confrontation drained a little more of her energy. When he appeared with a silver picture frame containing their wedding photo, Natasha almost let him take it. Almost. But then she remembered that day, how happy she'd been, how naive, and anger surged through her. Leave it, she said. It's our wedding picture. It's a reminder of promises you broke. Leave it. Tasha. Leave it or I call security and have you escorted out with nothing. Brandon set the frame down on the hall table, harder than necessary. The glass cracked slightly. Perfect. Now she could throw it away without guilt. Margaret appeared halfway through the loading process, having driven over from her own house after Natasha called her. She assessed the situation with one glance and immediately positioned herself as a neutral observer, preventing Brandon from taking anything Natasha might want to keep but was too tired to fight about. Brandon, those books are from Natasha's collection, not yours, Margaret said at one point, intercepting him with an armful of hardcovers. I've read these. Reading them doesn't make them yours. Put them back. The dynamic was strange, watching Margaret mediate between her son and daughter-in-law, clearly taking Natasha's side in every dispute. Brandon's resentment grew with each correction, but he didn't dare argue with his own mother. 3 hours in, the truck was mostly loaded. Brandon had made several trips upstairs, packing clothes and toiletries and personal items. He emerged one last time carrying a box of what looked like office supplies. That's everything, he announced, setting the box with the others in the truck. Did you check the closets? The bathroom cabinets? The office drawers? Diane asked, her tone suggesting he'd better have. Yes. I got everything that's mine. Good. Then you won't need to come back. Natasha stood up, signaling the end of this encounter. Brandon hesitated at the door, looking back at the house. I grew up visiting this property, you know. Before the mansion was built, when it was just empty land. My parents brought me here for picnics. I have memories here. You can keep your memories. The land is still mine. I know. I know that now. Brandon's voice cracked slightly. I really did love you, Tasha. I still do. I know you don't believe that, but it's true. If that's what your love looks like, I don't want it. He flinched like she'd slapped him. I hope someday you can forgive me. Not for my sake, but for Ruby's. She deserves to have parents who can be civil to each other. Civil is earned, Brandon. Right now, you should be grateful I'm not throwing your things out the window. Natasha crossed her arms over her belly. We'll work out visitation for Ruby through lawyers. Until then, don't contact me unless it's an emergency about the baby. What constitutes an emergency? You'll know it when you see it. Otherwise, all communication goes through Mr. Howard. Brandon looked at his mother, seeking support, but Margaret's expression remained cold and distant. You brought this on yourself, son. Don't expect sympathy from people you've hurt. Everyone makes mistakes, Mom. Not everyone makes mistakes that destroy their families. Not everyone betrays the people who trusted them most. Margaret's voice was steady but full of disappointment. You have your belongings. You have a place to live. You have income from the business. That's more than you deserve given what you've done. Be grateful and go. Brandon's face reddened, anger and shame mixing together. You're all acting like I'm some monster. Like I committed a crime. I had an affair. It happens. People move past it all the time. People move past affairs when the cheating spouse is genuinely remorseful and willing to do the work to rebuild trust, Diane said. You're just sorry you got caught. Sorry your comfortable life got disrupted. That's not the same thing. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what our marriage was like. I know you let your mistress publicly humiliate your pregnant wife. I know you lied for 8 months. I know you made promises to another woman using assets that weren't yours to promise. Diane stepped forward, her lawyer persona in full force. Those facts speak for themselves. Now take your boxes and leave before I lose my professional composure and say what I really think of you. Brandon looked at each of them one last time. His mother, his soon-to-be ex-wife, his sister-in-law. All looking at him with varying degrees of contempt and disappointment. Fine. I'm going. He walked out the front door, spoke briefly to the movers and climbed into the truck's passenger seat. The engine started. The truck rolled down the driveway, carrying Brandon and his belongings away from the mansion, away from the life he'd taken for granted. Natasha watched from the window until the truck disappeared beyond the oak trees. Then she turned to Margaret and Diane. Thank you. Both of you. I couldn't have done that alone. Yes, you could have, Margaret said gently. But you didn't have to. That's what family is for. Am I still family? Once the divorce is final? Of course. You're Ruby's mother. You're the woman my son was lucky enough to marry, even if he was too foolish to appreciate what he had. Margaret hugged Natasha carefully. Blood isn't what makes family. Love is. Commitment is. And you've shown more commitment to this family than Brandon ever has. Diane ordered dinner from Natasha's favorite restaurant, and the 3 women sat in the mansion's kitchen eating pasta and salad, talking about everything except Brandon. They discussed baby names, nursery decorations, Diane's latest case, Margaret's charity work. Normal conversation as if the past few hours hadn't happened. As if Natasha's life hadn't just been completely dismantled and was being rebuilt from the foundation up. After Margaret left and Diane went upstairs to the guest room she'd claimed for the duration of Natasha's adjustment period, Natasha walked through the mansion alone. Room by room, she reacquainted herself with the space she'd designed but never fully inhabited. The formal dining room with its crystal chandelier. The library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The conservatory filled with plants and natural light. The master suite with its balcony overlooking the lake. Every room was beautiful. Every detail perfect. But it all felt empty somehow, like a museum instead of a home. She ended up in what would become Ruby's nursery, a room she'd planned but never decorated. Pale yellow walls, large windows, space for a crib and changing table and rocking chair. This was where she'd bring her daughter home. This room in this house that was now entirely hers. No shared custody of the property. No compromises about decorating choices. No need to consider anyone else's opinions. The freedom should have felt good. Instead, it just felt lonely. Natasha sat on the floor in the empty nursery, her back against the wall, her hand on her belly where Ruby continued her constant movement. It's just you and me now, baby girl, she whispered. We're going to be okay. We're going to be better than okay. We're going to build a life full of people who truly care about us. People who don't lie or cheat or take us for granted. Ruby kicked, a strong jab against Natasha's ribs. I know you miss your daddy even though you haven't met him yet. He'll still be part of your life. He'll still love you. That's different from what happened between him and me. He broke adult promises, not parent promises. You don't have to worry about that. Whether Ruby understood or not was irrelevant. Saying the words out loud made them feel more true, more possible. Tomorrow, Natasha would start making real plans. Hire a nanny, buy furniture for the nursery, officially announce her move to the mansion to her architecture clients. Begin the process of stepping into her role as primary decision-maker at Pierce Enterprises instead of just signing papers Richard put in front of her. Tomorrow, she'd be the woman she'd always had the potential to become but had held back from being because she was trying to be a good wife. But tonight, she let herself grieve. Let herself feel the loss of the marriage she'd thought she had, the future she'd imagined, the partner she'd believed Brandon would be. She cried in that empty nursery, quiet tears that no one witnessed, allowing herself this one moment of pure emotion before she had to be strong again. And when the tears finally stopped, when exhaustion finally pulled her towards sleep, Natasha pulled herself up from the floor and walked to the master bedroom. She lay down on the bed that was now entirely hers, in the house that was now entirely hers, in the life that was now entirely hers to shape. It wasn't the ending she'd wanted when she married Brandon 5 years ago, but it was the beginning she needed now. And that would have to be enough. The first week after Brandon moved out was the hardest. Natasha woke up each morning in the massive master bedroom, reaching automatically for her phone to check if Brandon had texted. He hadn't. Mr. Howard had apparently been very clear about the no-contact rule, and for once in his life, Brandon was following instructions. Diane stayed at the mansion for those first few days, working remotely from one of the guest rooms, appearing at mealtimes to make sure Natasha ate and didn't spend too long alone with her thoughts. Margaret visited daily, usually in the afternoons, bringing food or magazines or just her quiet company. Richard came by once, ostensibly to discuss business but really to check on Natasha's mental state. "You're handling this with remarkable grace," he said, sitting across from her in the study. "I don't feel graceful. I feel like I'm barely holding it together." That's what grace looks like sometimes. Holding yourself together when everything inside wants to fall apart. Richard leaned back in his chair. "I want to discuss the business. Are you ready to take a more active role in Pierce Enterprises?" "I thought I already had an active role. Majority shareholder and all that." "On paper, yes. But in practice, I've been running things with Brandon as my assistant. Now that he's no longer part of the daily operations, we need someone to fill that gap." "You want me to work at the company office?" "Eventually. Not right now while you're pregnant and dealing with a divorce. But after Ruby is born, once you've had time to adjust to motherhood, I'd like you to seriously consider coming on board. Your architectural background would be valuable. We could expand into real estate development, combine your firm with our construction business." The idea sparked something in Natasha, a flicker of interest that had been absent for days. That could work. Create a full-service development company. Design, construction, property management. Exactly. You'd be CEO. I'd stay on as chairman for a few years to help with the transition, then retire and travel with Margaret like we've been planning. What about Brandon? He still has his 15%. He'll collect dividends but have no decision-making power. That ship has sailed. Richard's tone was firm. "I'm not letting my son destroy what I've spent 30 years building just because he can't keep his marriage vows." They spent the next hour discussing possibilities, drawing organizational charts, brainstorming expansion ideas. For the first time since discovering the affair, Natasha felt genuinely excited about the future. "Thank you," she said as Richard prepared to leave, "for believing in me. For giving me control when you didn't have to. I gave you control because you earned it. Because I saw your potential when Brandon only saw your beauty." Richard squeezed her shoulder. "You're going to do great things, Natasha. With or without my son. Probably better without him, honestly." After he left, Natasha sat in the study for a long time thinking about the future. A future where she ran a major business, raised her daughter, designed buildings that would stand for generations. A future that didn't include a husband but included so much else. The doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. Diane had gone back to her own apartment that morning, needing to prepare for an upcoming trial. Margaret usually called before visiting. Natasha walked to the front door and checked the security screen. A delivery person stood on the porch holding a massive bouquet of roses. She opened the door. "Yes. Delivery for Natasha Pierce." The flowers were beautiful, at least 3 dozen roses in shades of pink and white. Natasha took them, signed for the delivery, and carried the heavy vase inside. The card read, "I'm sorry. I'll always be sorry. Please give me another chance. Love, Brandon." Natasha stared at the card for a long moment. Then she walked to the kitchen, pulled the roses from the vase and threw them in the trash. All of them. She kept the vase because it was actually quite nice, but the flowers went straight into the garbage. Brandon didn't get to buy his way back into her life with roses. The phone call started that afternoon. Not from Brandon directly but from mutual friends. People they'd socialized with as a couple, other young professional couples who'd attended their dinner parties and game nights. "Hey Tasha. I heard about the split. I'm so sorry. Listen, we're having a barbecue this weekend. You should come. Brandon will be there but you two are adults. You can handle being in the same space, right? I know things are complicated but marriage is about forgiveness. Have you thought about counseling?" My cousin is a therapist who specializes in infidelity recovery. After the 5th call, Natasha stopped answering. Let them all think whatever they wanted. She didn't owe anyone explanations or performances of civility. Her mother, Grace, drove up from her home 3 hours away that weekend. A tall, elegant woman in her 50s with natural gray hair she wore proudly. Grace had raised Natasha and Diane as a single mother after their father left when Natasha was 5. If anyone understood rebuilding life after betrayal, it was Grace. My baby girl, Grace said, enfolding Natasha in a hug that smelled like cocoa butter and vanilla. Let me look at you. She held Natasha at arm's length, studying her face. You look tired. Have you been sleeping? Not much. And eating? When people force me to. Then it's good I'm here. I'll make you real food, none of this takeout nonsense. Grace looked around the mansion, her eyes widening. Lord have mercy. You designed all this. Every bit. And it's all yours? All mine. Grace shook her head in wonder. That man had to be a special kind of fool to mess this up. Had everything and threw it away for what? Some girl who wanted his money? Something like that. They spent the weekend together, Grace cooking all of Natasha's childhood favorites, telling stories about raising 2 daughters alone, offering perspective that only someone who'd survived similar pain could provide. You know what the hardest part was? Grace said Saturday night as they sat on the back terrace watching the sunset. Not the betrayal itself, but accepting that I'd been wrong about someone I thought I knew. I thought your father was solid, reliable, committed to our family. Finding out he wasn't, that he'd been living a secret life for years before he left, it made me question my own judgment. That's exactly how I feel. Like I'm stupid for not seeing the signs. You're not stupid. You're trusting. There's a difference. Grace sipped her tea. Brandon hid his affair because he knew it was wrong. Simone played games because she thought she could win. Neither of those things are your fault. You didn't fail. They did. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently. Worked less, paid more attention to him, been more. Stop. Right there. Grace set down her teacup. Don't you dare blame yourself for a man's choices. You could have been the perfect wife and he still might have cheated if he was inclined that way. Some people are loyal. Some aren't. You can't love someone into being faithful if they don't have that character. Natasha knew her mother was right, but accepting it emotionally was harder than understanding it intellectually. Sunday morning they went to church together at Grace's insistence. Natasha hadn't been to service since discovering the affair, hadn't felt capable of sitting through sermons about forgiveness and grace when all she felt was anger. But sitting next to her mother in the small church near the mansion, listening to the choir and the pastor's words about starting new chapters, something shifted. Not forgiveness for Brandon, but acceptance that this was her reality now. Acceptance that she couldn't change the past but could shape the future. After church, Grace pulled Natasha aside in the parking lot. You're going to be okay, baby. I know it doesn't feel that way now, but you will be. You're stronger than you realize. You survived losing your father when you were 5. You survived putting yourself through college when I couldn't afford to help much. You survived building a business in a male-dominated field. You'll survive this too. How did you do it? Raise us alone, stay positive, not become bitter. Who says I didn't become bitter? Grace laughed. I had plenty of bitter years. But bitterness is heavy and I was already carrying enough. Eventually, I put it down because it was weighing me down more than it was hurting your father. I don't know if I can put it down yet. Then don't. Not yet. Be angry. Be hurt. Feel all of it. But don't live there forever. Don't let what Brandon did define who you become. Grace left that afternoon to drive back home, but her words stayed with Natasha. The following week, Natasha threw herself into preparing for Ruby's arrival. She ordered nursery furniture, interviewed potential nannies, read parenting books, attended her prenatal appointments. Staying busy helped. Kept her from thinking too much about Brandon or the divorce or the future beyond the baby's immediate needs. Simone Carter tried to contact her once, sending a message through someone they both knew from the architecture community. The message asked if they could talk woman to clear the air. Natasha's response, delivered through the same intermediary, was simple, no. She owed Simone nothing. Not conversation, not forgiveness, not closure. The woman had knowingly slept with a married man, had attended a family event specifically to stake her claim, had publicly humiliated Natasha while she was 7 months pregnant. There was no clearing the air possible after that. Mr. Howard called midweek with updates on the divorce proceedings. Brandon had signed all the papers without contest, which surprised everyone. His lawyer had apparently advised him that fighting would cost money he didn't have and would result in him getting even less than what was being offered. The divorce should be finalized within 60 days, Mr. Howard explained. We've structured the settlement so custody arrangements can be modified as needed once the baby is born. For now, we've outlined general visitation rights with the understanding that the specifics will be worked out after you've recovered from childbirth. And the business? Clean separation. You maintain controlling interest. Brandon receives quarterly dividends from his 15% but has no operational authority. If he wants to sell his shares, you have first right of refusal to purchase them at market value. What if I can't afford to buy them? Then he can sell to an approved buyer, someone who understands they're investing in a company you control. But honestly, I don't think he'll sell. Those shares are his only reliable income source. He'd be foolish to get rid of them. After hanging up, Natasha allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Everything was falling into place. The divorce was progressing smoothly. The business structure was solid. She had a home, financial security, family support. Things were actually going to be okay. That night, she slept better than she had in weeks. When she woke in the morning, Ruby was unusually active, rolling and kicking and making her presence known. Natasha lay in bed with her hands on her belly, feeling every movement, and she realized something had changed. She wasn't thinking about Brandon anymore. Wasn't wondering what he was doing or if he was sorry or if they could have saved the marriage. She was thinking about Ruby. About the nursery that still needed painting. About the nanny interviews scheduled for next week. About her first day at Pierce Enterprises, whenever that would be. She was thinking about her future, not her past. And that felt like progress. That felt like healing. Ruby Grace Pierce entered the world on a Tuesday morning at 6:43, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and her mother's nose. Diane was in the delivery room, having taken emergency leave from her firm to be there. Margaret and Richard waited in the hospital corridor, ready to meet their granddaughter. Grace had driven through the night and arrived just before Natasha went into active labor. Brandon was notified by text message after the birth. He arrived 2 hours later, looking nervous and unsure, carrying a teddy bear that was comically oversized. "Can I see her?" he asked Diane, who'd stationed herself as gatekeeper outside Natasha's room. "Wait here. I'll ask." Diane slipped into the room where Natasha was resting, Ruby asleep in her arms. "Brandon's here. Wants to meet Ruby. What do you want me to tell him?" Natasha looked down at her daughter, this tiny perfect person who'd been the one bright spot in the past 2 months. Ruby deserved to know her father, despite everything. Keeping them apart would hurt Ruby more than it would hurt Brandon. 20 minutes. He can hold her for 20 minutes, then he needs to leave. Diane nodded and returned to the hallway. Moments later, Brandon entered, approaching the bed like he was walking on glass, afraid any sudden movement might shatter something fragile. "Tasha, how are you feeling?" "Tired? Sore? Happy?" She adjusted Ruby in her arms. "Do you want to hold her?" "Can I?" Natasha carefully transferred the sleeping baby to Brandon's arms, showing him how to support her head. Brandon looked down at his daughter and his eyes filled with tears. "She's perfect." "Yes, she is. She has your nose. And your fingers. She has your chin. And I think she might have your eyes, though it's too early to tell for sure." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Ruby's soft breathing and the hospital room's ambient noise. "I'm sorry," Brandon said quietly. "I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry I wasn't better. Sorry I wasn't the husband and father you both deserved." Natasha didn't respond immediately. She watched Brandon hold their daughter, saw genuine love and regret in his expression, and felt a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. "You can still be a good father," she finally said. "What happened between us doesn't have to define your relationship with Ruby. I want to be present for her, to be someone she can count on. Then prove it. Not with words or promises or grand gestures. Just show up. Be consistent. Be reliable. That's what matters." Brandon nodded, his attention still on Ruby. "Can I visit her? At the mansion? Or should I wait until you set up a formal schedule? We'll figure out a schedule that works. For now, once we're home and settled, you can come by on Saturdays for a few hours. We'll see how it goes and adjust from there." "Thank you. I don't deserve your generosity." "This isn't generosity. This is Ruby's right to know her father. Don't confuse the two." The 20 minutes passed quickly. When Diane knocked to signal time was up, Brandon reluctantly handed Ruby back to Natasha. "She's amazing. Thank you for her." She's not a gift I gave you. She's a person we created together. Don't thank me for her existence. Just do right by her. After Brandon left, Margaret and Richard came in to meet their granddaughter. Margaret cried, holding Ruby with the careful precision of someone who'd done this before. Richard looked uncharacteristically emotional, his usual stern demeanor softening as he touched Ruby's tiny hand. She's going to be a fighter, Richard said. Look at that grip. Grace came in last, taking her turn with the baby, whispering promises and blessings in Ruby's ear. Natasha watched her family surround her daughter with love and felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. Ruby might not have a traditional nuclear family, but she had this. A grandmother who'd driven through the night to be there. An aunt who'd taken time off work. Grandparents who already adored her. Great-grandmother who'd survived her own betrayals and built a life of dignity and strength. Ruby had everything she needed. They went home 3 days later. The mansion felt different with a baby in it, both fuller and emptier at the same time. Fuller because of Ruby's presence, all her equipment and supplies and constant needs. Emptier because Natasha was acutely aware that she was doing this alone, without a partner to share the middle-of-the-night feedings or the diaper disasters or the moments of pure joy. But she managed. With help from the nanny she'd hired, a kind woman named Susan who had 20 years of experience and came highly recommended, and with support from Diane who visited every few days, and with Margaret who seemed to appear whenever Natasha was at her most overwhelmed. Brandon came on Saturdays as agreed, spending 3 hours with Ruby under Natasha's supervision. He was awkward at first, uncertain how to change diapers or soothe her crying, but he learned. To his credit, he showed up every week without fail, canceling other plans to make sure he was there for his daughter. Natasha appreciated the consistency even as she maintained emotional distance from him. They spoke only about Ruby, only about practical matters like feeding schedules and doctor's appointments. They didn't discuss the divorce, which had been finalized 2 weeks after Ruby's birth. They didn't discuss Simone, whose social media presence had gone silent after the garden party humiliation. They didn't discuss what might have been. They focused on what was, a daughter who needed both her parents to be functional adults. 3 months after Ruby's birth, when Natasha had recovered physically and adapted somewhat to motherhood, Richard approached her again about joining Pierce Enterprises in an official capacity. "I know you're overwhelmed," he said during one of his visits, "but I think working might actually help. Give you something for yourself that isn't about being a mother or recovering from divorce. Something that's just yours. I have the architecture firm, which you haven't taken a new project from since before Ruby was born. Your junior associates are handling everything. When was the last time you actually designed something?" Natasha realized she couldn't remember. The firm ran smoothly without her, which was good, but also left her feeling disconnected from work she'd once loved. "What are you proposing?" "Come in 2 days a week. We'll set you up with an office at Pierce Enterprises headquarters. You can work on the merger between your architecture firm and our construction business. Create that full-service development company we discussed. It's a project you can do at your own pace with built-in flexibility for Ruby's needs." The idea appealed to her more than she'd expected. Getting dressed in professional clothes, engaging her brain with complex problems, having adult conversations about things other than baby schedules, it all sounded incredibly attractive. "I'll think about it." "Take your time. But not too much time. You're too talented to waste away in this mansion, no matter how beautiful it is." A week later, Natasha accepted the offer. She started going to the Pierce Enterprises office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, bringing Susan and Ruby with her. The company had a dedicated childcare room that Richard had quickly renovated when Natasha agreed to come on board. Susan stayed with Ruby while Natasha worked, close enough that she could check on them between meetings. The work energized her in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Designing the merger, creating new business structures, negotiating with contractors and suppliers, it all came naturally. She'd been doing parts of this work for years without realizing it. By the time Ruby was 6 months old, the merger was complete. Pierce Development Corporation was born, with Natasha as CEO, combining her architectural expertise with the company's construction capabilities. They landed their first major contract within a week. A mixed-use development in the city center, residential and commercial space, designed to be both profitable and community-focused. Natasha threw herself into the project with enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. She worked reasonable hours, never sacrificing time with Ruby, but when she was at the office she was fully present and engaged. She hired more staff, mostly women, many of them mothers who appreciated the flexible schedules and on-site childcare she instituted. She created a culture at Pierce Development that valued work-life balance while still maintaining high standards for quality and productivity. The company thrived. Within 8 months, they had 3 major projects underway and a waiting list of clients. Architecture magazines ran features on Natasha's designs. Business publications praised her innovative management style. And through it all, Ruby grew. She learned to roll over, then sit up, then crawl. Her first tooth came in, and her first word was "Mama," which made Natasha cry happy tears for the first time in what felt like forever. Brandon remained consistent with his Saturday visits, gradually increasing his time with Ruby as she grew older and he grew more confident in his parenting skills. Natasha appreciated his efforts even though things between them remained cordial but distant. He was dating someone new, one of the other divorced parents from a playgroup he joined. Natasha felt nothing when he mentioned it, which seemed like the clearest sign that she truly moved on. Her own social life was limited. Between work and Ruby, she had little time or energy for dating. A few men had asked her out, professional contacts who'd made their interest known, but she'd politely declined. She wasn't ready. Might not be ready for a long time. And that was okay. She had Ruby. She had her work. She had family and friends and a life she'd built on her own terms. She didn't need a man to complete her. She was complete on her own. One Saturday, almost a year after the garden party, Brandon arrived for his visit with Ruby and lingered after she'd fallen asleep for her nap. "Can we talk?" he asked. "About Ruby? About us? About everything?" Brandon shifted his weight nervously. "I know you've moved on. I know you're happy. I can see it every time I come here. But I need to say some things and I'd appreciate it if you'd listen." Natasha considered sending him away but decided she could give him 5 minutes. They sat in the living room, the same room where Simone had once imagined herself belonging, and Brandon spoke. "I've been going to therapy. Individual counseling, not couples, because I know that ship has sailed. Just working on myself, trying to understand why I did what I did. And I learned I've spent my whole life coasting on other people's accomplishments. My parents' money, their business, their reputation. I never built anything myself. Never proved I was worth anything beyond my last name." Brandon looked down at his hands. "When I married you, I thought I'd finally done something right. Finally made a good choice. But then you were so successful, so talented, so independent, and I felt like I was fading into the background again. So I found someone who made me feel important, even though that importance was based on lies." Natasha listened without interrupting. "I'm not trying to excuse what I did. There's no excuse. But I understand it now. And I'm working on being different. Being better. Not for you because I know we're done. But for Ruby. So she grows up with a father who has his own identity, who's made something of himself beyond what he inherited. What does that look like practically? I got a real job. Not just collecting dividends from the business. I'm working at a consulting firm, advising companies on operations management. Using my business degree for once." Brandon smiled slightly. "The pay is half what I used to live on, but I'm earning it myself. That feels good. I'm glad you're making positive changes. I know you probably don't believe me. I know I've burned every bit of trust you ever had in me. But I want you to know, watching you this past year, seeing you build Pierce Development, seeing you be an amazing mother to Ruby, it's been humbling. You didn't need me. You never needed me. I was just lucky enough to be married to you for a while." Natasha felt a stirring of something that might have been compassion. Brandon was trying, genuinely trying, to be better. That didn't undo the past, but it mattered for Ruby's future. Keep showing up for Ruby. Keep being consistent. That's what matters now. "I will. I promise." After he left, Natasha sat in the quiet house, Ruby sleeping upstairs, and reflected on how far she'd come in a year. From devastated wife to successful CEO. From betrayed partner to confident single mother. From victim to victor. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been dark days when she'd wondered if she'd ever feel whole again. Days when the loneliness felt overwhelming. Days when she'd questioned every decision. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd thrived. And she knew with absolute certainty that she'd rather be alone and strong than partnered and diminished. Whatever came next in her life would be on her terms, based on her choices, reflecting her values. That was worth more than any marriage built on lies could ever be. June arrived again, warm and bright, the same month when everything had fallen apart and somehow come together at the same time. Natasha stood on the terrace of the mansion, now truly her home rather than just a property she owned, watching staff set up for the garden party she was hosting. White tents, string lights, tables arranged around the fountain that had witnessed her humiliation a year ago. But this wasn't the Pierce family annual party. This was her party, celebrating the first anniversary of Pierce Development Corporation and the successful completion of their flagship project downtown. Ruby toddled around the terrace under Susan's watchful eye, wearing a red dress that matched her personality perfectly. At 14 months old, she was curious and fearless, exploring everything within reach. She'd inherited Natasha's determination and, unfortunately, Brandon's stubbornness. The combination made her a handful. "How are we feeling?" Diane asked, appearing beside Natasha with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Nervous? Excited? Nauseous?" "All of the above." Natasha accepted the lemonade gratefully. "Some of the people coming today were here last year. They witnessed the whole mess with Brandon and Simone. So let them see how you've risen from those ashes. Let them see what you've built." Diane gestured at the mansion, the gardens, the evidence of success everywhere. "You're not the humiliated pregnant wife anymore. You're the CEO of a thriving company. You're the mother of that beautiful chaos machine over there. You're the woman who owns all of this. That's your story now. You're right. You're always right. Write that down. I need it in writing for future arguments." Guests started arriving at 6:30. Business partners who'd worked on the development project. Employees from Pierce Development, most of whom had never been to the mansion. Clients interested in future projects. Architecture colleagues from Natasha's old firm, now integrated into the larger company. Margaret and Richard arrived early, Richard immediately scooping up Ruby with grandparental enthusiasm. Grace drove up with her new boyfriend, a kind man named Thomas who taught high school mathematics and treated her mother like she was precious. Brandon came too, having been invited specifically because he was Ruby's father and excluding him would have been petty. He brought his girlfriend Jennifer, a nurse who seemed genuinely nice and didn't try too hard to bond with Natasha. They kept to themselves mostly, and Natasha appreciated the low-key presence. No drama. No tension. Just 2 adults who'd once been married sharing space at a party for their daughter's benefit. As the sun set and the string lights began to glow, Richard tapped his glass for attention. The crowd quieted, turning toward the terrace where he stood with Natasha beside him. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Richard began, his voice carrying across the gardens. "A year ago Margaret and I hosted a party in this same space. That party ended with revelations that changed our family in fundamental ways. Tonight we're celebrating what came from those changes." He turned to Natasha. "My daughter-in-law, though that title doesn't really capture what she is to us anymore. Natasha is family regardless of any legal documents. She's also one of the most talented business leaders I've had the privilege of working with. In the past year she's taken Pierce Development from concept to reality, has overseen 3 major projects, has created jobs for 50 people, and has redefined what our family business can be." Applause rippled through the crowd. Natasha felt her face flush with warmth. "But more than that," Richard continued, "she's shown remarkable grace under circumstances that would have broken many people. She's rebuilt her life with dignity and strength. She's raised a beautiful daughter. She's proven that the worst moments of our lives don't have to define us. We define ourselves by how we respond to those moments." He raised his glass. "To Natasha Pierce. To strength. To new beginnings. To the future of Pierce Development." "To Natasha," the crowd echoed, glasses raised. Natasha blinked back tears. She'd prepared a brief speech thanking everyone for their support, but standing there surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her success, she found herself unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Diane rescued her, stepping forward with her own glass raised. "I'll add one more toast. To my sister who taught me that you don't need a man to have a full life. You just need vision, determination, and the willingness to bet on yourself. Tasha, you're my hero." "To Tasha," the crowd repeated. The party continued for hours. Music played from hidden speakers. People danced near the fountain. Food was plentiful and delicious. Ruby stayed up past her bedtime, charming guests with her toddler antics, eventually falling asleep in Natasha's arms. As the crowd thinned and the night grew late, Natasha found herself standing in the same gazebo where she'd retreated a year ago, heartbroken and uncertain. But tonight she wasn't alone. Diane, Margaret, Grace, and several other women who'd become friends over the past year joined her. "Do you remember this time last year?" Margaret asked quietly. "Every detail." Natasha looked out at the lake, dark and peaceful. "I stood here thinking my life was over. Thinking I'd never be happy again. And now?" Grace prompted. "Now I know I was wrong. My life wasn't over. That version of my life was over. The version where I made myself smaller to fit into someone else's story. The version where I prioritized other people's comfort over my own truth. Natasha adjusted Ruby in her arms. This version is better. Harder sometimes, lonelier in some ways, but better. Truer. Do you ever think about dating? One of her employees asked, a woman named Patricia who'd become a good friend. I know it hasn't been that long, but you're young, successful, beautiful. Men must be interested. Some are. But I'm not interested in them. Not yet. Natasha smiled. I spent 5 years in a marriage that looked good on the outside but was hollow on the inside. I'm not rushing into anything new until I'm absolutely sure it's real. Until I'm absolutely sure someone sees me for who I actually am, not what I can give them. Smart, Diane said. Though when you are ready, I have a colleague who's asked about you 3 times. Not interested. I'm just saying he's successful in his own right, respectful, has his life together. Still not interested. Fine. But I'm keeping his number handy for when you change your mind. They laughed, the sound carrying across the dark water. Eventually the last guest left. The staff cleaned up efficiently and the mansion fell quiet. Natasha carried Ruby upstairs to her nursery, now fully decorated in yellows and greens, and tucked her daughter into the crib. You had fun tonight, didn't you? Natasha whispered, stroking Ruby's hair. So many people who love you. So many people who showed up to celebrate with us. Ruby slept deeply, exhausted from the excitement. Natasha wandered back downstairs, not quite ready for sleep despite her own exhaustion. She walked through the mansion room by room, remembering the woman who designed these spaces 5 years ago. That Natasha had been hopeful and in love, planning a future with a man she'd thought would be her partner forever. This Natasha was wiser, scarred but stronger, building a future she controlled. Both versions were valid. Both had value. But this version was hers alone, and that made all the difference. She ended up in the study, sitting at the desk where she now spent several hours a week working on business plans and project proposals. Papers covered the surface. Permits for a new development, design sketches for a community center, budgets and timelines and endless details. This was her empire now. Small but growing, built on her talent and her vision and her willingness to take risks. Brandon's 15% of Pierce Enterprises gave him a comfortable income, but it didn't give him purpose or pride. He was finding those things now in his new job, his therapy, his relationship with Ruby. But this business, this company, this legacy, it was all hers. The thought should have felt lonely, but it didn't. It felt powerful. Natasha's phone buzzed. A text from Richard, congratulations on a successful party. You've come so far in a year. I'm proud of you. She texted back, thank you for believing in me. For giving me the tools to build this life. His response came quickly, I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. I just made sure the legal paperwork matched reality. You did all the rest yourself. Natasha set down her phone and looked out the study window at the gardens beyond. The string lights still glowed, scheduled to stay on until midnight. The fountain still ran. Everything looked exactly as it had a year ago, but everything was different. She was different. The woman who'd been humiliated in these gardens had become the woman who owned them. The woman who'd been publicly mocked had become the woman everyone respected. The woman who'd lost her marriage had gained herself. And as Natasha sat in that study, in that mansion, in that life she'd built from the ruins of her old one, she realized something profound. She wasn't waiting to be happy anymore. She wasn't waiting for some future moment when everything would finally be okay. She was happy now. In this moment. In this life. With this daughter and this work in this home that was entirely hers. The garden party a year ago had revealed who truly owned the mansion. But more importantly, it had revealed who Natasha truly was beneath the role of dutiful wife. A fighter. A builder. A woman who could be knocked down and choose to rise up stronger. The mistress had bullied her at a family event, thinking she had power. But the father-in-law's revelation had shown everyone that true power wasn't about who you humiliated or who you manipulated. True power was owning yourself, your choices, your future. And Natasha Pierce owned all of that and more. She owned the mansion. She owned the business. She owned her story. And that was the happiest ending she could have asked for. Not because she'd destroyed Brandon or Simone with revenge. Not because she'd found new love to replace what she'd lost. But because she'd found something better than either of those things. She'd found herself. And that was worth more than any man could ever offer.